Hello, folks. Happy Yuri's Night. This is Christopher from the Hudson Area Public Library. We are doing a virtual party this year because of the COVID-19 issue. We were supposed to be at Barker's. Barker's has hosted us before. Great place to get together and have some appetizers and some beverages and talk about kind of milestones in the space program. So big shout out to Barker's. I picked up, thanks Barker's. I picked up some appetizers and some beverages to have here virtually with you, and our prize drawing tonight is a Barker's gift card for people that are participating tonight. So welcome everybody. I'm sorry we can't be there in person, but hopefully this gets you some of the information and a little bit of the fun that we're going to be having down there tonight. So why is Yuri's Night? Some people ask me this, and the question is a simple one to answer. It's about Yuri Gagarin. It's celebrating the first time a human being ever traveled into space. So it was April 12th, 1961 is the exact date that his flight occurred. He did one orbit of the Earth, a little over, it's about a 90-minute orbit. His was a little bit longer than that, but he completed one orbit and successfully returned for a safe landing on the Earth. So this is kind of the celebration, the commemoration of the kickoff of kind of human exploration into space. And that's why it's called Yuri's Night. So it's Yuri Gagarin. He was the first human being to travel into space. He was a Russian cosmonaut. Cosmonaut is the Russian name, like astronaut is in our country. And the other thing we'd be giving out, if I can get that up in the camera shot, so we got the Yuri Gagarin stickers, we'd be giving those out. And we had temporary tattoos. I'll give Tyler, my DJ, a sticker here. We can give her ones for that. So yeah, we're having fries and drinking some beverages and just going to talk a little bit about the anniversary of it and what that kind of means for us today and into the future. So, so real quickly, the mission was pretty dangerous at the time. We actually didn't know how dangerous it was until years later, because the Soviet Union, being a closed society, didn't have freedom of the press and didn't have, welcome members of the press from other countries to kind of document it, where everything in the United States was always transmitted on live TV with news anchors from all around the world that wanted to attend. So we saw the successful photos that he had completed the mission and landed, but the actual details, as I said, did not come out until much later. So they've actually got a model to kind of show a little bit. This is the capsule, kind of a spherical shaped capsule that was the part of the vehicle that Yuri Gagarin was in, and he returned to the Earth in. And I left the hatch off the back here so you can kind of see what I'm going to demonstrate. So that's, I'll slide this out here. So this is Yuri Gagarin, model of him sitting in his ejection seat. It slid into the capsule there. So everything went fine for the liftoff and the orbit of the Earth. Things got a little bit more interesting when he was going to do the return through the Earth's atmosphere. So the way it was supposed to go was, and I've got the other part here, this is the back part of his vehicle, kind of the service module equivalent. Those that know, like the Apollo space program, there was the command module at the front and the service module at the back. So it's kind of joined like this in orbit. And then this green area you see was supposed to separate from the backstage. It's in the white with the silver band. And it was going to begin its entry routine back into the atmosphere. But that back part, that green area I showed you, did not fully detach from the capsule. It was supposed to come clean off, and it stayed attached by a few cables that were supplying him oxygen and electricity to the capsule. They're kind of supposed to get guillotined off and severed, and for some reason they didn't completely sever. So that green area on the back was still attached and kind of slamming into the capsule as it was returning through the atmosphere, knocking Yuri Gagarin's capsule this way and that. rotating over. When the re-entering continued, the atmosphere gets so hot that it actually burned away those cables, and so then it was able to cleanly separate. So first disaster averted, but that could have been catastrophic. That could have destroyed the capsule, put it into a fatal tumble, and ended it, but luckily that didn't happen. So now he's in this configuration, which is what he was hoping for, and then descending down through the atmosphere. And then the interesting thing is the engineers did not make this capsule strong enough to survive a parachute landing, which is the way it happens today. The parachutes deploy and the capsule lands on land, and the recovery crews go out and get it. For weight concerns, they couldn't make this structurally sound enough. The extra weight of the reinforced metal and the supports, they couldn't do it. So their solution for it was, which is why I left the hatch off, when he got to about 30,000 feet, it would pop off the hatch that you see here, and then it would fire his ejection seat, much like a military plane would have an ejection seat, and would fire him out away from the capsule. So now he's free from the capsule. He has to disengage from this ejection seat, and then a parachute would deploy at 10,000 feet, and he would come back and safely land. So all of those things in that process worked well, and he safely landed by parachute on the ground. And then the Soviets kind of controlling the media, the capsule came down and did a hard landing where it did. They kind of did a photo of him standing beside the capsule, intimating like he had just gotten out of the capsule and had landed under parachutes, when there was no way that that would have worked. He had to do this kind of crazy eject at a certain altitude in the rocket sled, detach from the rocket sled, deploy a parachute, come down, because the craft would not have been able to protect him. So it was a very dangerous mission, and he survived that with flying colors, and the Russians became the record holder for the first human launched into space. And I've got, if I can pull this up and share with you, I'm gonna see if I can share my screen, because I've got a so hopefully you can see this now, and it's just a quick PowerPoint to kind of take you through some of the milestones. So this is a picture of Yuri Gagarin, and then April 12th, 1961. So he was a Russian fighter pilot, and then there was a group of them that was selected for the astronaut candidate, cosmonaut candidate program, and Yuri was a finalist for that and became of note on the mission we just described. And then here's a picture of the sticker I just showed you, which is kind of the Yuris Night official commemorative item. That's all the badges and the stickers you'll see. There's Yuris Night parties all around the world. And so these are the stickers I've purchased from them to kind of be the official things that are handed out no matter where you are. Those are the icons that you'll be handed. And then the picture on the other side is Yuri Gagarin's spacesuit, and then him standing beside the Vostok 1 capsule. So you can see it was very small, pretty tight fit. It has the hatch off like I was kind of showing you on the model. So you can kind of see the ejection sled seat in there, and then his controls, whatnot, for giving you a size comparison. And then here is the R7 booster. And then again, just another view of that capsule. You can see this one a little bit better, the kind of heat damage that happens to the capsule as it's coming back through the atmosphere, thousands of degrees of heat. And some people ask that, like, how did the Russians do this first? How did they get ahead of where we were at? And to answer that fully, we kind of have to jump back a little bit further, because going back to the end of World War II, those of you that are kind of histories of World War II, history buffs on that will know that the Germans had a beginning rocket program with Dr. Werner von Braun and the V2 rocket. That was the first kind of mass-produced, liquid-fueled, modern-day rocket, kind of the grandfather of all rockets that came after that. So when Germany lost the war and the Russians and the Americans were closing from different sides on Berlin, After the war was over, one of the top goals of each intelligence office on both sides was to try to round up and locate as many V2 hardware and scientists as you could to bring back to your country, because the Germans were light years ahead of any other country for a rocket program. So most of you may know the US kind of had a big coup with Wernher von Braun, and his team decided to surrender to the American side and kind of migrated in a fashion with Wernher von Braun's brother leading assistance to try to make sure that they could get towards the American lines and surrender to the American side. The Russians captured other more minor researchers and scientists, and they also captured some V2 rocket bodies and whatnot. So with the prizes of war these countries took back to their sides. Also, on a historical note, as many of you may know, the United States dropped the 2 atomic bombs on Japan, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, toward the end of the war, and we were the first country to possess a nuclear weapon. Skip forward a little bit, the Russians were trying to match that US capability, and about 3 years after the end of the war, they developed a workable nuclear weapon and tested it. One difference being the Russians were not as good at the miniaturization that the United States was at the time. So their warhead was much larger and heavier than what the Americans had developed. And it was not really going to be feasible to be put on a bomber airplane and taken any great distance. So they looked to a rocket booster, an intercontinental ballistic missile type that we know today, to be able to deliver this heavy warhead at the top. And so the rockets they knew had to be greater thrust lift ability, able to carry heavier loads, bigger rockets than the V2. So they kind of used the V2 rockets that they captured as a baseline and scaled that up to produce the rocket that you see pictured here, which was the one that launched the Sputnik satellite and also launched, I've got a picture of that kind of started the space race here, the Sputnik probe, which is in October 1957. And then we skip ahead to 1961, they're getting the first person in space. So they had this heavy lift booster at the time, and that's what allowed them to get the early space victories with Sputnik and with Yuri Gagarin and Sputnik 2 sending a dog up and whatnot. So that's really what led to their early dominance in the space race, as it came to be known, because they'd had to, of necessity, develop this heavy lift booster, which the United States had not done. So this is Alan Shepard, who wound up being the second person in space just under a month later. So we're talking April 12th, 1961 was Yuri Gagarin. May 5th, 1961 was Alan Shepard's suborbital mission. And that's why I have his flight trajectory pictured here. Yuri Gagarin made a full orbit because that heavy booster could get him high enough to enough speed, 17,500 miles an hour, to put you in orbital velocity. And he was able to complete an orbit. Alan Shepard launched roughly a month later, but he could only do the trajectory you see pictured here on the chart. It's what we call a ballistic trajectory. You're kind of going straight up, arcing over, and coming straight back down. The Redstone rocket that he flew on did not have enough thrust to get him up to orbital speed, and so this is the best that we could counter with. Ironically, Alan Shepard was scheduled to launch about a year before he did, and then he would have been the first person in space. But there was engineering delays with the rocket, further testing, problems, delays. So the launch date kept getting postponed and postponed. So it was very frustrating for him and a lot of the rocket team, because they thought they had the rocket, they had things set, they could have launched months and months before Yuri Gagarin had, but they did not. And that brings up the interesting question on would the space race have turned out differently if the United States had led? Would there still have been that push to get to the moon and do that if the United States was in the lead? And then this one, if I can have this play for you, this is a great little simple.
Yuri Gagarin, first man in space, 12th of April, 1961. Yuri Gagarin was born near Moscow, Russia, on March 9th, 1934, and was the son of a carpenter. Yuri joined the Soviet Air Force in 1955, and by 1959, he was training to become a cosmonaut. In 1960, Gagarin was selected along with 19 other candidates for the Vostok 1 program. Eventually, the program was narrowed down to 2 possible candidates. Gagarin and German Titov both had excellent performance in their training and were short enough to fit in the Vostok cockpit. Gagarin was perhaps selected because of his modest background, which suited Soviet Union propaganda, but also because the other candidates voted for him. His excellent memory skills, fast reactions, and mathematical skills. At age 27, on the morning of 12th of April, 1961, cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin was helped into his spacesuit and made his way to the launch pad. He climbed into the Vostok spacecraft, wondering if he would return back to Earth, but was calm. At 9:07 a.m. Moscow time, as the engines rumbled, Gagarin said, "Let's go." The rockets blasted off into space, and in 10 minutes, the Vostok spacecraft separated from the launch rocket. Gagarin was in space. He crossed the Atlantic Ocean, then the Pacific Ocean, and as his spacecraft passed over Africa, he prepared to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere, which would not be easy. He had orbited Earth for 108 minutes during the flight. As he made re-entry, the cables joining the Vostok's descent module to the service module failed to detach properly, almost causing disaster as it violently shook Gagarin, until they eventually pulled apart. As he re-entered Earth's atmosphere, he experienced forces up to 8 times the pull of gravity, but remained conscious. Because the Vostok spacecraft had no engines to slow down its re-entry upon landing, Gagarin had to eject out and parachute to Earth. He landed safely near the Volga River. Yuri Gagarin was made a national hero of the Soviet Union and became a global celebrity. He died on March 27, 1968, during an accident in a military training flight. He was just 34 years old. Subscribe for more history videos. Get Simple History, the space race, today. Thank you.
So that's a little video that kind of nicely summarizes the highlights of his life and the mission. And then really quickly, I wanted to put this page up. This is what Yuris Night, they do this every year in person, and there's about 10,000, I think, functions all around the world, celebrations. So they're moving it online this year, as we are. And so I wanted to put up this tag. It's webcast.yurisnight.net. You can see that hopefully on the bottom of the card. So that'll be this Saturday, April 11th. It'll be starting at 6 p.m. Our time. And they're going to have excellent speakers, astronauts. Bill Nye, the science guy, will be presenting. So they're going to be showing a lot of fun videos and speakers. And a lot of people dress up in costume and whatnot. It's a fun night, so I wanted to put that card up there. So hopefully everybody can check that out on Saturday. And then I will try to get back to our screen here. I'll leave that up for another second in case anybody wants it. So again, it's webcast.yurisnight.net. And I'll put that in the description for the video when we post that as well. And then there we go. So a couple other artifacts I wanted to share. This is kind of a neat one that I was able to get. If I can hold that up there. So this is a piece of a Soyuz rocket booster, which is kind of the cousin of the one we just looked at, the R-7. So interestingly, the Russian architecture for their rockets has all been pretty much the same for the last 60 years. They're all kind of derivatives off of those initial designs. So you'll see it says Soyuz on there, and you can see the green paint. And then this particular section is from those 4 strap-on boosters that are around the core stage. And when you launch from Kazakhstan and Russia, you're launching over land, a little different than at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, where you go out over the Atlantic Ocean. So when their booster goes out and it drops those 4 boosters rockets that are strapped to the sides, about 2 minutes into the mission, they fall on land. And there was a company that was able to get permission to drive out after a launch and recover those metal pieces. And this company, I think, made watches, the watch faces out of the metal. But they did have one option where you could buy just a slug, like a keychain version, which is why it has a hole at the end. But I really wanted to show, just to show you the thickness on the aircraft grade aluminum, because you don't usually get access to a real rocket booster. So it's very strong. It's possible to bend these. I give these to like third and fourth grade classrooms. I'm like, go ahead, try to bend it, because they think it's so deceptively thin that they can do that. But it's very strong. And so that's just a section of the rocket booster, so you can see that. And then the other one I had is, this is kind of an artist depiction of what that would have looked like if you were seeing Yuri Gagarin go by. So this is that upper stage booster, kind of firing him into orbit. And then the part that was sticking to his rocket that was supposed to separate was this area where you can see all the oxygen and helium bottles and whatnot that were being fed into his capsule by those connecting lines. And this is what did not detach, kind of kept hanging on by a couple of cables and almost ended his mission. But that's what it would look like. All the antennas on the front for communication, and then the little porthole window that Yuri could see out during his missions. That's kind of an artist depiction of what that looks like. And then I've also got, there's a lot of great books on the Russian space program. So there's a couple here that kind of show you some of the history of it. And I like this one so you can see the kind of rocket on the launch pad, all the towers around it for prepping it for launch. So this is the Baikonur Cosmodrome, which Russia still uses, the same launch facility, same launch pad even that Yuri Gagarin launched from. Rockets still take off from to the International Space Station. So that's a neat historical photo on that one. And then I've got a great, obviously, Yuri Gagarin being a national hero in Russia. I've got a great photo of one that I would love to visit one day, but this is a amazing memorial to him, the statue, if you can see that, where it's kind of a rocket at the top with this big majestic kind of sweeping up to kind of indicate the rocket thrust propelling him up. But there's a lot of amazing memorials to him and his mission in Russia that would be pretty amazing to see. So that's some of the things that I wanted to share. Again, I'll put links on the description for the video, because I think we'll be posting this to YouTube as a resource. So some of the books I cited, the videos I used, and the Yuris Night celebration coming up this Saturday, which will be great. If you can be able to attend, I'll be there watching along and listening to everything. So I thank you for joining us for the celebration. I'm going to give one more shout out to Barker's here for helping us out with the gift card drawing and getting some eats there. So hopefully next year I will be able to go back there and do this all together. So I think we're going to wrap it up for that. I'm just looking around to see if there's anything I forgot to share. Did the model, oh, there's one other. I've got a kind of cool, and I don't know the particular mission on this. There was a museum I got to go to, if you can see that. This is a Russian Soyuz mission pin. So that's the Soyuz spacecraft, which is a descendant of the Vostok spacecraft. But this is a real Russian flight pin. So I think I got this at a place called the Museum of Flight in Seattle, Washington. And they had, I'm trying to get the focus there so you can see it. But they had some real Russian space program souvenirs. So I had to grab a couple of those. So that's kind of my celebration of Yuris Night. And hopefully provide a little information on why we celebrate it, and maybe intrigued or piqued your interest in wanting to learn a little bit more. So thank you for watching. Again, my name is Christopher Mick. I'm a library assistant at the Hudson Area Public Library, kind of do a lot of the STEM programming and whatnot there. So hopefully we'll see you back at the library real soon. Thanks a lot.